Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Stephanie from Masari. Looking forward to talking about DeSci today. If for some of you who might not be familiar with DeSci, it's bringing innovation to the world of science using Web3 tools. We wrote a report about 6 months ago at Masari covering DeSci, and there's been a huge number of new projects that have launched within the last 1 or 2 years alone. I think identified 86 new projects last year. So lots to cover, and I'm going to get us started with doing some intros. Alok, if you want to get us started.
Sure. Keep it quick. My name is Alok. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ViBio. I'm a scientist, spent 15 years at the bench, then worked in Web 2, building a bunch of life science-focused software companies. And then after my first daughter was born with 2 different rare diseases that had no dedicated treatments, I decided to figure out how we can solve the financing problem in the biotech industry. So, thanks.
Absolutely. So my name's Eric. I work as the head of operations for DeSci Labs. Have always been passionate about scientific research and have recently had the chance to go a little bit further into it through fellowships at the Go Fair Foundation and a large variety of infrastructure initiatives across scientific research itself. So I'm excited to be up here. I'm excited to talk about DeSci, and I'll pass it off.
Hi, thanks for having us. I'm Jesse Hudson. I'm Chief Legal Architect at Molecule. So what I've done is helped to design the legal and smart contract protocol that allows for the tokenization and management of scientific intellectual property on-chain.
Thanks, everyone. So there's a lot of different problems that can be solved in science using crypto tools. So I want to get started. Eric, can you let us know what are the biggest categories that can be solved using crypto infrastructure in the world of science?
Yeah, absolutely. So I tend to come at things from more of an infrastructure perspective. One of the, I guess, larger moments in academia over the past year has been something called the Nelson Memo. It was a policy paper that the White House dropped, which said that all research needs to be open access when it's published, and that data needs to be available with it. I think that Web3 has a lot of potential to help support the ideals of open access and to help move some of these things forward. So one great example of a place where I think Web3 could tie in is data sharing itself. It's the idea that whenever a piece of knowledge is published, we need to make sure that a complete trail of provenance is published along with that piece of research. And that as someone looks to validate a piece of knowledge for future use, they have the code, they have the data, they have the ability to come back, check someone else's work, and say, yes, I agree with this piece of research, or no, I have some questions about this piece of research, and here's what they may be. To me, that is one of the best use cases of blockchain, is tying in some of the existing concepts of provenance to research itself.
Alok, do you want to go on with that?
I think Eric touched on a really important one. An adjacent one that I've sort of seen has been this confluence to be able to bring a drug to market requires people, it requires capital, and it requires tools. And oftentimes these tend to be very disparate and uncoordinated. And oftentimes the folks who are making the decision around those, especially from a capital standpoint, tend to be misaligned with the other components of that ecosystem. And so I think Web3 and crypto really offers an opportunity to bring those 3 together with the right community and the right people in mind.
And Jesse, do you want to tell us a little bit more about IP NFTs and the work you're doing at Molecule?
Sure, happy to do so. And thanks for these great insights from my fellow panelists. My perspective is more about tokenization and how can that help to solve some of these problems in science, specifically through registering IP on chain and then allowing groups of people to collectively govern it. There's this question of, what if diabetics collectively owned insulin? How would that change the world? And how would that change incentives for that patient community to govern and price and distribute the drug that they're using to improve their lives? And so what the IP NFT does is it allows somebody who's funded science, who has IP rights, who's basically funding an intellectual property developer, the scientist, to register those rights on chain, and then to do whatever you want with those, tokenization, distribution, and governance. And so what you can see start to emerge using tokens is a hybrid legal and smart contract stack that allows for these intellectual property developers to develop their IP in a way that distributes governance over it to a community of people, which I think can be very powerful because it can enable diabetics to collectively own insulin.
So given all the different things we can achieve using Web3 infrastructure for science, I'd love to hear what has been the reaction to the traditional scientific world. Are they aware of some of these initiatives that you're working on? Are they against it? Are they for it?
Yeah, I'm
You can start.
happy to answer real quick, and because we're just coming off the back of a conference in Berlin called DeSci Berlin, where we had speaking there a representative from Pfizer who became a strategic partner to one of these biotech DAOs in DeSci called Vita DAO. And so the reception among industry has actually been super positive. Pfizer is interested. The universities that we've spoken to are very interested. For example, Newcastle University, who have received funding from Vita DAO for a project related to autophagy, which is when the body's cells eat themselves in order to, promote recycling of the cells. And I'm sure you guys, and Alok especially, know a lot more than I do about that. And they've been so receptive to the idea that the TTO actually asked us, are you going to distribute these new tokens through farming?
Let's answer the questions coming down this way, Eric, if you want to give us your perspective as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll just echo a lot of Jesse's sentiment. There's been a very positive response from a lot of the legacy players in the space, and especially for anyone who goes into more publishing and infrastructure. They go in because they believe that scientific knowledge can help us make a better world, that science is humanity's engine of progress, and that, as you go in and you become scientifically minded, you start to ask the question why. You start to tinker with things. You literally just can't help it because it's who you are as a person. So this idea that someone can come in and ask the question why? Why are we doing it this way? How can we work to change things? How can we work to improve and to better the systems that underpin humanity's engine of progress? I think that that's something that's resonated very well. There's been a couple large publishing groups who've been excited to work with us and who I think we're looking to continue collaborations with. We've seen a good bit of progress with funding agencies as well, especially given some of the policy papers that have come out, which I mentioned earlier, and then just individual scientists themselves who've had to deal with problems like peer review, or processes like peer review, I should say. That's probably a better way to put it. There's been a very positive response, and it's exciting to see.
I think just to add on, I've seen a really positive response when you talk about the problems that you can solve and the outcomes that you're trying to drive towards. I think everybody in biotech and in science wants to see the work that they do every day go and help the broader world. But there's a lot of friction and misalignment in the existing infrastructure, which I think prevents them from doing so. Therefore, you're seeing a lot of excitement from all these different solutions. The main issue, however, I think, is that there still is a big reputational and adoption gap between an individual who does science every day in the lab to someone who is Web3 native. And I think the reputational hits, unfortunately, that we've taken earlier this year and last year has further, unfortunately, cast a bit of a shadow in that regard. So I think when you focus on the solutions that you can offer to the existing problems, huge amount of excitement, more work we need to do around communicating and structuring the solutions.
It's really nice to hear that there's been a lot of positive reactions, because you're right, I feel just in crypto in general, there's been a little bit of a cloud and shadow for people not really understanding all the good that it can bring. So yeah, really glad to hear that. But also touching on the challenges a little more, and Alok, we can start with you and head that way. What other challenges have you faced when building your protocol?
Yeah, I'll be honest. Being based here in the United States, one, you have a regulatory shadow that's being cast in terms of what does it really mean to issue a token and facilitate direct ownership and governance. The second, I'd also say, is there's a fair amount of cultural challenges that exist. As we are building Vibe over the past year and change, we've had challenges with biotech companies, insurance companies, patient communities, having a lot of challenges working with a DAO or a crypto-oriented organization. So The former is regulatory, the latter is more sociological, but I think those are among the two larger ones that I've seen more than the technology itself.
Yeah, I think some of the challenges that we've faced, we've kind of touched on in this panel to an extent. Some of it's the perception of crypto, and I've really appreciated the focus at mainnet this year on how we abstract crypto away from end users, how we focus on the benefits, how we talk about the things that blockchain can do to help solve problems in the wider world, as opposed to, y- you know, anyway, um, so I think one of the things that's been huge for us is that perception aspect. Then another thing, Web3 as a community is still growing, and there's still infrastructural development to be done. There's a lot that needs to be done to make sure that the Web3 world works as well as the Web2 world. So that's been another challenge from an infrastructural standpoint, is figuring out how to correctly interface with blockchain technology and how to work around some of the existing gaps that are there. But a lot of great people working in Web3, a lot of progress that's being made very fast, and we're excited to continue developing.
I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen is in education. So people don't really understand yet how IP tokens or IP NFTs really work. And even in the BioDAOs that are using the technology stack, what's happening is that as it's not super clear, they're starting to drift towards becoming more like university endowments investing in startups. And that, to me, is the wrong path. The right path is to double down on tokenization, double down on using this crypto infrastructure in order to advance a new paradigm for how science can be done, funded, and managed. Another big challenge I see is a lack of connection within the DeSci community, like unified tooling. Like what I'd love to see is VitaDAO using DeSci Labs protocol stack, ViBio and VitaDAO partnering together on building, bringing a drug through the pipeline, and building these kind of connections that are within DeSci itself to strengthen this emerging sector within the space that for many people feel like it is one of the great use cases that it can actually help to alleviate human suffering, go beyond what you said is this kind of, Ouroboros of crypto just feeding itself into crypto feeding the world and helping to actually alleviate human suffering.
Totally agree with all those points, and bridges nicely into my next question, which is I want you guys cover such different parts of the scientific life cycle, and are you already working together? Like, how can your projects be additive to each other? And if you're not working together now, what might you be able to do together in the future? Eric, let's start with you.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with a lot of the points that Jesse's made. I think as we build, it's a very close ecosystem of people who would like to make a difference in the world. And there's, I guess, a cultural overlap. And as we continue to grow, I would love to see more collaborative building towards technical overlap. Absolutely. So one of the things that we're excited to continue working on is building out the DPID protocol. That's something that is kind of the foundation of the research objects that we build at DeSci Labs. So what we see is trying to provide provenance and transparency in basic research, trying to make it easy for someone to actually come in, look at a research project that has been made, say, yes, there's data, yes, there's code, yes, this particular piece of knowledge is reproducible, it's open access, and have other projects come in, look at that PDF, maybe use some of the AI tooling that's being made to quickly summarize it, where at a glance, without necessarily going into the information that's underpinning that research project, someone can get a clear understanding of what's actually there. And then beyond that one specific research project, thinking about at a macro level. As someone who's working in a funding agency, who's working in a university, how do you get a better perspective of the work that your scientists are doing and the impact that it has on the world? So maybe that's a good place to jump off.
Yeah, no, that's a great place. Because you think about the BioDAOs that exist today, like VitaDAO and HairDAO, ViBio, all of these organizations that are almost on-chain biotech companies. they actually get a ton of deal flow of projects that are being submitted to them from scientists who say, yeah, I want to work with you. I want to get funding, even though, as you said, there's still a gap between scientists who understand crypto and scientists who want to work in it because of this regulatory shadow. There's still a huge amount of deal flow coming through. And to be able to take those projects that are submitted, put them into a research object so that they have all of this amazing data attached to them, I think will make it easier to translate from that first stage of let's develop some intellectual property to the clinic and actually make translational research that makes a difference in the world.
Yeah, and last quick note, I think my colleagues here have touched on some really important ones. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to collaborate, especially as, one, we have a software-first mindset, and the key thing about software is that it's intended to be modular and composable, such that as we start to grow and scale, we can take the best from each individual project and have something that's greater than the sum of its parts. And so the domain of DeSci is only about 1.5 years, 2 years sort of old as a whole, so I think it's a little early to expect that to happen out of the gate, but I think you're already starting to see some of those examples, as my colleagues mentioned.
And what are some of those projects or pieces of infrastructure that you're most excited about? What emerging things are you starting to think about adopting into your protocols?
Yeah, well, I'd say obviously the molecule folks and the work they're doing on IPNFTs and the fractionalization. I'll also say that I'm a personal angel investor in Molecule, and Paul and team are an angel investor in Vibe, so we have a little bit of a bias there. Obviously some of the work that Eric and the DeSci Labs folks are doing around publishing and provenance, right, I think is also exciting. Some of the stuff that we're doing is also around analyzing data to be able to assess risk and reward around programs. One of the challenges we've seen in communities, which I think my colleagues can highlight, is that when you move from a Web 2 world to a Web 3 world, you're substituting one form of bias with a community form of bias. Not a bad thing, but you have to be aware of it. And so I think in our world, if we can use historical data and algorithms to actually help inform the potential of a given drug, in our case, for example, I think it enables those communities to make better, higher fidelity decisions around where they allocate capital and resources. So that's one set of examples I'd offer.
I'll echo Alok's first point without going too far into it. Excited to integrate with a large number of DeSci projects and see the ecosystem continue to grow. I'm going to throw one other, category in there. I am a huge fan of compute over data. That is an area of Web3 that has really just sparked my imagination. We work very closely with the Bakoyao team, trying to figure out not only how can data be shared, but how can it be reused. If you have a data set that took $1 million to make, tens of thousands of hours on a supercomputer, it is absolutely critical that other people can form papers out of this particular data set. But being able to reuse that in an efficient manner where compute infrastructure may not necessarily keep up with network infrastructure on the internet is a tough challenge. So I'm excited to see that.
The question is about tooling, correct? Tooling we're excited about? Sorry.
Tooling or projects or something that's emerging in DeSci at the moment that you find really exciting. I'm sure there's a lot of answers you'd have for that
there is a
question.
lot. One especially comes to mind, and that's from HairDAO, which, for those of you not familiar, it's a patient community looking to solve hair loss. And they've got this great mimetic branding, but they're super serious about it. And they're actually group buying their first drug that they've funded the science on now, and they're going to test it on their own community, which is like a decentralized, not a clinical trial, right? But it's a self-tested trial. And the way that they're doing it is they're gamifying that so that the people who are in their community who are testing this drug, a thyroid hormone that you rub on your head where you're losing hair or anywhere else you want hair, and depending upon the results from that, people are going to be on a leaderboard depending upon how much they've contributed to it. So what's really cool to me about they're calling it Ready Play Hair 1. And this Ready Play Hair 1 game, it incentivizes people in a way that brings in all this kind of cool tech stuff into being part of a clinical trial, a decentralized clinical trial. Though they don't call it a clinical trial because it's not a clinical trial. But it's the first drug that is being produced by one of these DAOs and starting to translate into clinics. So that's what I'm most excited about, to see where that goes and who wins the game.
That's exciting. And there's so many other, DAOs doing different kinds of, like there's DeSci DAO and HairDAO, and I really recommend, we're out of time, so I guess we can't really go into any more projects, but I highly recommend that you guys check out the DeSci report on masari.io, where we talk about some other, all the other 86 plus projects. There's just so much in the world of DeSci to cover. Too bad we couldn't keep talking, but thank you guys so much, and thank you everybody for joining us. And yeah, we'll talk more in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you.